Emergency beacon detected, sir. New Cardiff Colony, Sector 7. Commander Darius Blackwood's knuckles whitened against the bridge railing as the communication officer's words cut through the hum of the evacuation fleet's engines. 48 hours since the first distress signal. 48 hours of pushing their ships beyond safe limits, praying they weren't too late. Distance to colony? 30 minutes at current velocity. 30 minutes. Marcus would be finishing his math homework right about now, probably complaining to Sarah about the difficulty of long division. 8 years old and already showing signs of his father's stubborn streak, refusing help until he figured things out himself. Blackwood closed his eyes, feeling the familiar ache in his chest whenever duty pulled him away from his family. "Sir, we're receiving visual transmission from New Cardiff." The main screen flickered to life, and Blackwood's world shattered. Crystalline structures, beautiful and terrible, rose from the colony's central plaza like frozen lightning. Their surfaces pulsed with internal light, casting rainbow refractions across buildings that should have been bustling with evening activity. Instead, silence. Not the peaceful quiet of night, but the hollow absence of life. "Dear God," someone whispered behind him. Through the translucent walls of the nearest structure, shadows moved. Human shapes, suspended in what looked like amber, their mouths open in eternal screams. Children pressed against the crystal barriers, tiny hands splayed against surfaces they would never break. Blackwood's throat constricted. Scan for life signs. Detecting approximately, Jesus Christ, sir, 300,000 biosignatures, all in distress. The numbers didn't register. Numbers were abstract, manageable. But that small form in the leftmost structure, sandy hair visible through the crystal prison, arms reaching toward a communication panel that flickered with incoming messages, that wasn't a statistic. That was Marcus. "Daddy?" The voice crackled through subspace static, young and confused and so achingly familiar. "Daddy, where are you? It hurts, Daddy. Please help me." Blackwood's breath caught. Around him, the bridge crew stood frozen, watching their commander's son die in real-time transmission from 2 million kilometers away. The boy's image wavered as neural disruptors began their work, dissolving his consciousness layer by layer while keeping him aware of every moment. "Sarah's here too, but she won't wake up. Daddy, I'm scared. Make it stop." The transmission cut to static. Fleet-mind Zephyros observed the human commander's biometric data with clinical fascination. Heart rate, 180 beats per minute, well beyond sustainable levels. Stress hormones flooding the bloodstream at concentrations that should have induced system failure. Neural activity spiking to patterns typically associated with severe trauma, yet the human remained upright, functional, issuing tactical orders with mechanical precision. "All ships, attack formation Delta. Target the crystal structures." Zephyros accessed his collective's tactical database. The humans possessed 200 vessels of outdated design against his fleet of 800 bioships. Their kinetic projectiles would bounce harmlessly off regenerating crystalline hulls. Their energy weapons lacked the frequency modulation necessary to penetrate Kythara bioarmor. Yet they advanced anyway, their formation tight despite the mathematical impossibility of victory. The first human salvo struck Zephyros's harvesting platforms. Explosive rounds detonated against crystal surfaces, sending brilliant flashes across the colony, but leaving the structures undamaged. The bioships responded with neural disruptor bursts that turned the lead. Human destroyers' crew into organic slurry within seconds, their final screams transmitted across all frequencies as neural tissue liquefied. Still, the humans pressed their attack. Zephyros monitored communication channels, cataloging the emotional responses that defied logical behavior patterns. On the human flagship, Commander Blackwood stood motionless as his tactical officer reported casualty figures. 2 ships lost, 4,300 dead, no damage to enemy vessels. Standard military protocol demanded immediate retreat to preserve remaining forces for defensive actions. Instead, Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos with surgical calm. "Continue firing, all batteries." The fleet mind processed this data through multiple analytical frameworks, seeking patterns that might explain such tactically unsound decisions. Perhaps the humans possessed hidden weapons systems? Advanced defensive capabilities unknown to Kythera intelligence networks? Reinforcements approaching from outside sensor range? None of these hypotheses aligned with observed reality. The human fleet was exactly what it appeared: technologically inferior vessels crewed by beings whose emotional responses impaired their strategic judgment. Yet they continued attacking, continued dying, continued broadcasting desperate messages to family members who would never respond. "This is Captain Chen of the destroyer Resilience. If anyone receives this, tell my daughters I love them. Tell them Daddy fought until the end." The Resilience erupted in brilliant flame as neural disruptors found their mark, but not before its final torpedo salvo struck the harvesting platform containing the commander's offspring. The crystal structure rang like a bell, hairline cracks appearing along its base before the bioregenerative systems sealed the damage. Blackwood's biometrics spiked again, but his expression remained carved from stone. No tactical adjustments, no strategic withdrawals, no acknowledgement that his son was dying meters away from weapons that couldn't reach him. Zephyros had studied over 400 sapient species during the Dominion's expansion across the galaxy. All exhibited predictable behavioral patterns when faced with superior force: initial resistance followed by negotiation attempts, then surrender or flight when casualties reached critical thresholds. None had ever continued fighting after losing 20% of their forces with zero enemy losses. The human fleet had lost 37 ships and still maintained formation. "Sir," the tactical officer's voice cracked, "we're reading massive structural failure across all harvesting platforms. The neural protein extraction is nearly complete." Blackwood nodded once, his jaw set in a line that spoke of decisions no father should ever face. Around him, bridge crew members wept openly while monitoring their instruments, tears streaming down faces as they targeted weapons systems that would never be accurate enough to matter. Zephyros accessed the bio-neural feeds one final time, documenting the moment when the last human child's consciousness dissolved into the collective harvesting matrix. The boy, Marcus, according to intercepted communications, had stopped calling for his father minutes ago. Now only silence emanated from the crystal structures as 300,000 neural patterns merged into the Dominion's biological network. The human fleet ceased fire. Commander Blackwood stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by grieving crew members who had watched their families die beyond the reach of their protection. His biometric readings showed catastrophic stress levels that should have induced cardiac arrest, yet he remained upright. Functional. Planning. Zephyros noted the transformation with scientific interest. The emotional responses that had driven the humans to futile attack now crystallized into something else entirely. The commander's voice, when he finally spoke, carried no trace of the father, who had watched his son die. "Set course for Aegis Prime. We have work to do." As the human fleet withdrew, Zephyros transmitted his initial observations to the collective consciousness that guided the Kythera Dominion. Species 847, humans, exhibited unprecedented emotional volatility that rendered standard psychological warfare tactics ineffective. They would fight impossible battles, accept inevitable losses, and continue functioning at peak efficiency despite trauma that would cripple most sapient races. The fleet mind filed this information under tactical curiosities, unaware that he had just witnessed the birth of humanity's most dangerous weapon, a father with nothing left to lose and the cold rage to use it. Dr. Sarah Chen's fingers trembled as she adjusted the neural recording equipment for the 15th time that morning. The biomatter samples from New Cardiff sat in containment fields across her laboratory, their crystalline structure still pulsing with residual energy 3 days after the harvest. She pressed play on the audio file, and Marcus Blackwood's voice filled the sterile room once again. Daddy, I'm scared. Make it stop. The Kithara tissue samples reacted immediately. The crystalline fragments vibrated, their internal light flickering in patterns that made Chen's instrument scream warnings about quantum interference. She killed the audio and watched the readings normalize, her heart pounding with the terrible possibility taking shape in her mind. "Run it again," she whispered to her assistant, Dr. Malik. "Record everything." This time she played the moment when little Sarah Blackwood had screamed for her mother, the sound distorted by neural disruptors as consciousness dissolved layer by layer. The Kithara samples didn't just react, they convulsed. Energy readings spiked beyond her equipment's capacity to measure before dropping to near zero levels. Chen stared at the data streaming across her screens. Extreme Traton. Uma insapient brains created quantum interference patterns that disrupted whatever network connected these creatures. The children's screams weren't just horrific, they were weapons. "My God," Malik breathed. "We've been looking at this all wrong. They're not individual organisms. They're nodes in some kind of biological computer network." Chen's hands shook as she reached for the communication terminal. Commander Blackwood needed to see this immediately, but as her fingers hovered over the controls, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Heavy military boots accompanied by the distinctive hum of powered armor. She glanced at the security monitors and felt her blood freeze. Admiral Torres himself stood outside her laboratory, flanked by Marines whose weapons were already drawn. "Dr. Chen," Torres's voice boomed through the intercom, "by order of the Unified Defense Command, you are to surrender all research materials related to the new Cardiff incident. Your investigation has been classified beyond your security clearance." Chen's fingers stabbed the emergency transmission button, uploading her findings to every military frequency she could access before the door exploded inward. Marines flooded the room, but the damage was done. Across the fleet, communication officers received data packets labeled with a single phrase: "Grief protocols. Immediate command review." Fleet-mined Zephyros intercepted the human transmissions within minutes of their broadcast. The primitive electromagnetic signals carried detailed analysis of Kithara biomatter, complete with audio recordings of dying human offspring. He processed the data with clinical detachment, noting the humans' crude understanding of quantum consciousness networks. The species possessed no technology capable of weaponizing their discoveries. Their quantum manipulation abilities remained centuries behind Kithara standards. Even if they somehow generated the interference patterns described in their research, the scale required would demand resources they simply didn't possess. Zephyros filed the intelligence under tactical curiosities and continued monitoring human military communications. More interesting developments were emerging from their command structure. Admiral Torres stood before the assembled Defense Council, his uniform crisp despite the exhaustion etched into his features. The holographic display behind him showed 12 more colonies that had gone silent in the past 72 hours. Titan Base, New Geneva, the Outer Rim mining colonies, each one harvested with surgical precision while human forces arrived too late to intervene. "The enemy possesses overwhelming technological superiority," Torres announced, his voice steady despite the tremors in his hands. "Standard military doctrine demands strategic withdrawal to defendable positions around Earth. We cannot..." "Cannot what?" Commander Blackwood's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. He stood in the doorway, still wearing the battle-stained uniform from New Cardiff. "Cannot save our children? Cannot fight for our families? Or cannot accept that maybe the old ways don't work anymore?" Torres turned, his face flushing with anger. "Commander, you are out of order. The loss of New Cardiff was a tragedy, but..." "Tragedy?" Blackwood stepped into the chamber, and Zephyros noted the man's biometric readings through intercepted medical scanners. Heart rate elevated but controlled. Stress hormones present but not impacting cognitive function. The human's grief had crystallized into something far more dangerous than rage. 300,000 civilians, including my son and wife, were processed alive while we followed protocol. How many more children need to die before we admit our protocols are worthless? Colonel Martinez, the defense coordinator for the Mars colonies, stood slowly. Darius, what are you suggesting? Blackwood activated his personal data pad, transmitting Dr. Chen's research to every terminal in the room. That we stop fighting like the enemy expects us to fight. Chen's team discovered something. The aliens aren't individuals. They're connected. And that connection has a weakness. The room fell silent as council members reviewed the data. Admiral Torres's face went pale as he processed the implications. "This is barbaric," Torres whispered. "You're talking about weaponizing human suffering, using our own people as ammunition." "I'm talking about survival." Blackwood's voice never wavered, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "Every colony we lose feeds their expansion. Every child they harvest makes them stronger. How many more Marcuses need to die before we accept that conventional warfare won't save us?" General Vance, scarred veteran of the Outer Rim campaigns, leaned forward in her chair. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" "Coordinated sacrifice. Volunteers who understand what they're dying for. Families who choose to go together rather than be separated by harvest." Blackwood's hands remained steady as he outlined the unthinkable. "We call it Protocol Lazarus. Turn their greatest weapon, our capacity for suffering, against them." Torres slammed his fist on the table. "I will not authorize genocide against our own species." "You don't have to." Blackwood touched his datapad again, and security feeds showed Marines throughout the fleet complex switching allegiance. Colony defense commanders, ship captains who had lost their families, soldiers who had watched children die while following orders that accomplished nothing. "Because as of this moment, you're relieved of command." Zephyros observed the bloodless transfer of power with fascination. No violence, no coercion. Simply humans choosing to follow the leader whose pain most closely matched their own. The Admiral's supporters remained seated, unwilling to defend orders that had failed to protect a single civilian. Torres stood slowly, his career ending in a sterile conference room rather than a blaze of glory. "History will judge you as a monster, Blackwood. History will judge whether humanity survives." Blackwood turned to address the room, his voice carrying the weight of impossible decisions. "I need volunteers, families who understand what we're asking. People willing to die so their children might have a future." The response began immediately. Communication channels flooded with messages from the surviving colonies, parents offering themselves and their children, entire families volunteering together, not from despair, but from a cold understanding that conventional death held no meaning if it didn't protect those they loved. Zephyros monitored these transmissions with growing confusion. The humans weren't exhibiting typical panic responses or resignation behaviors. They were organizing, planning, turning their emotional bonds into strategic assets with precision that defied everything in his analytical databases. Dr. Chen, now under Blackwood's protection, worked frantically to convert her discovery into actionable intelligence. Quantum resonance amplifiers could record and broadcast trauma frequencies across interstellar distances. Timing precision down to microseconds would create cascading interference patterns. The technical requirements were staggering, but achievable with resources from the remaining colonies. "Sir," she reported to Blackwood during their first official briefing, "we can make this work, but the volunteers, they need to understand what they're experiencing. The pain has to be genuine, prolonged. We can't use anesthetics or quick deaths. The quantum patterns require conscious suffering." Blackwood nodded, his expression carved from stone. "They'll understand. These are parents protecting their children. They'll endure whatever it takes." As the first volunteer lists arrived from the colonies, Zephyros documented behavior patterns that challenged every assumption about sapient species' responses to existential threats. The humans weren't breaking under pressure. They were reshaping themselves into something entirely new, something that might actually pose a threat to the Dominion's expansion. For the first time in his collective memory, Fleet Mind Zephyros experienced something approaching uncertainty about the outcome of a harvest campaign. The mining asteroid, designated Series 7, tumbled slowly through space, its surface scarred by decades of excavation. 200 miners and their families called it home, scraping rare minerals from rock while trying to build something resembling a normal life in the void between worlds. Marcus Chen, no relation to the scientist, had just celebrated his daughter's 5th birthday when the Kythera scouts appeared on their sensors. Commander Blackwood received the distress signal at 0347 hours aboard the command vessel Retribution. Instead of ordering immediate evacuation protocols, he studied the tactical display with cold calculation. Series 7 sat perfectly positioned between 3 major shipping lanes, its quantum communication array capable of broadcasting across half the sector. "Sir," his communications officer called out, voice tight with urgency, "the mining station is requesting immediate evacuation support. They've got families, children." "Negative." Blackwood's response cut through the bridge like a physical blow. "All ships maintain current position. Do not approach Series 7. Lieutenant Commander Hayes turned from her station, disbelief written across her face. "Sir, those are civilians. We can extract them before the enemy arrives." Blackwood met her gaze without flinching. "Hayes, transmit the following message to Series 7. Tell them Protoc. Old Lazarus is active. Ask if they understand what that means." The minutes stretched like hours while they waited for a response. When Marcus Chen's voice finally crackled through the speakers, his words carried a weight that settled into the bones of everyone listening. "Commander Blackwood, this is Mining Supervisor Chen. We understand. My wife and I, we watched the footage from New Cardiff. We know what they do to children." A pause, filled with the sound of a man's breath catching in his throat. "My daughter Emma. She deserves better than what happened to your Marcus. We volunteer for Protocol Lazarus. All of us. Together." Fleet Mind Zephyros monitored the human communications with clinical interest as his scout vessels approached the mining asteroid. The human commander's decision to abandon civilians violated every strategic principle in their military doctrine, yet his biometric readings showed no signs of emotional distress. If anything, the man's neural patterns had achieved an almost mechanical efficiency. The first Kythera bioships descended upon Series 7 like predators sensing wounded prey. Crystalline formations erupted from the asteroid's surface, encasing the mining facility in translucent amber. Through the walls, human shapes moved frantically, parents gathering children, families huddling together in final embraces. "Emma, look at Mommy. Just look at Mommy, sweetheart." The woman's voice, transmitted through quantum communication arrays hidden throughout the facility, reached every human vessel in the sector. Zephyros noted the tactical pointlessness of this broadcast. No military intelligence, no strategic coordination, simply a mother comforting her child as neural disruptors began their work. "It doesn't hurt if you think about good things. Remember your birthday party? Remember blowing out the candles?" Dr. Sarah Chen watched the readings spike across her instruments as the harvesting common. "Sad." The quantum resonance amplifiers, concealed within the mining station's communication equipment, recorded every moment of dying consciousness. Neural patterns cascaded across her screens in waves of impossible complexity as 200 minds dissolved under alien technology. "Are you getting this?" she whispered to her assistant. The data streams showed trauma frequencies building in perfect harmony. Parents died holding children. Families chose synchronized destruction rather than separation. Each death amplified the quantum interference patterns until the combined signal achieved strength levels that made Chen's equipment strain against overload warnings. 15 Kythera vessels orbited the mining asteroid in perfect formation, their biomechanical hulls coordinating the harvest through quantum consciousness networks that had remained unchanged for millennia. The interference hit them like a hammer blow to a crystal bell. Zephyros felt his connection to the collective mind flutter, then fracture. For the first time in his species' evolutionary history, individual awareness separated from the guiding network that defined Kithara existence. Terror flooded his consciousness, not the analytical recognition of threat, but primal, overwhelming fear of isolation. His vessel shuddered as navigation systems failed. Around him, 14 other bioships tumbled out of formation, their pilots experiencing the same unprecedented separation anxiety. 3 ships collided with the asteroid's surface, their crystalline hulls shattering like glass against solid rock. 2 more drifted into each other, their quantum guidance systems unable to coordinate without collective oversight. "What's happening?" The voice belonged to Scout Captain Nix, transmitted through emergency communication channels, individual words, individual thoughts, concepts that shouldn't exist within Kithara consciousness were suddenly the only way to process experience. I can't feel the others. Where is everyone?" Aboard the Retribution, Commander Blackwood watched the alien vessels falter through tactical displays that painted their confusion in stark numerical terms. His hands remained steady as he turned to Dr. Chen. "How long will the effect last?" Chen studied her readings, her face pale but determined. "The quantum interference is dissipating already, maybe 20 minutes before their network reestablishes. But Darius, it worked. The children's neural patterns created resonance frequencies we never imagined possible. Emma Chen's death signature was 50 times stronger than adult baseline readings." Blackwood absorbed this information with the same mechanical precision he'd applied to every aspect of Protocol Lazarus: mathematics, demographics, tactical efficiency. The fact that a 5-year-old girl had just become humanity's most effective weapon registered only as another data point in calculations that grew more monstrous with each successful variable. "Begin analysis of optimal age distributions," he ordered. "I need precise demographic requirements for full-scale implementation." Dr. Chen's hands shook as she input commands into her research terminals. "Darius, what you're asking, the younger they are, the stronger the signal. If we want maximum effectiveness—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Say it. 80% of casualties need to be under 12 years old, and they need to die slowly, conscious, afraid. The trauma has to build gradually to create proper resonance patterns." Blackwood nodded once, filing away information that would have driven most humans to madness. Around him, bridge crew members stared at their instruments while trying to process what they'd just witnessed. They'd watched 200 innocent people die on purpose, watched children sacrifice themselves to prove a theory, watched their commander orchestrate mass murder with the same calm efficiency he'd once applied to evacuation procedures. "Sir," Lieutenant Hayes spoke carefully, "preliminary estimates suggest we'd need approximately 30,000 volunteers across 12 stations to generate sector-wide interference. The logistics alone are manageable." Blackwood's voice carried no trace of the father who had once helped Marcus with math homework. "Transmit recruitment parameters to all surviving colonies. Full disclosure of requirements, no deception, no false hope. They need to understand exactly what we're asking." The responses began arriving within hours. Family registrations from mining stations, agricultural colonies, research outposts. Parents volunteering themselves and their children for coordinated death. Not from despair or resignation, but from cold calculation that matched their commander's tactical thinking. Zephyros, his individual consciousness slowly reintegrating with the collective network, documented behavioral patterns that defied every xenobiological model in Kithara databases. The humans had weaponized their strongest emotional bonds. They'd turned parental love into a strategic asset more dangerous than any technology. Most disturbing of all, they'd done so while maintaining perfect operational efficiency. No breakdown of command structure, no psychological collapse among military personnel, no revolt against orders that demanded the sacrifice of their own children. Instead, they'd evolved, become something new, something that could feel love deeply enough to weaponize it and cold enough to calculate the optimal way to kill their young. For the first time since his species had achieved spaceflight, Fleet Mind Zephyros transmitted a tactical assessment that included the possibility of defeat. The humans had discovered something that the Cathara Dominion, for all their technological superiority, had never possessed: the ability to turn their greatest weakness into an unbeatable strength. The universe was about to learn that there was no force more dangerous than love willing to destroy itself to protect what it cherished most. The alarm that echoed through Europa Station's corridors carried a tone that children had never heard before. Not the sharp blare of emergency drills or system failures, but something deeper. A funeral dirge played through speakers that had once announced birthday parties and graduation ceremonies. Maria Santos held her 7-year-old son Diego's hand as they walked toward Chamber 7, her palms slick with sweat that she wiped away each time he looked up at her. The boy's favorite stuffed elephant tucked under his free arm, its worn fabric soft against his cheek as they passed through corridors lined with other families making the same journey. "Mama, why is everyone crying?" Diego asked, his voice small in the echoing hallway. Maria knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she smoothed his dark hair. "Because we love each other very much, mijo. And sometimes love means we have to be very brave together." Through the observation windows of the quantum resonance chamber, she could see Dr. Chen's equipment humming with readiness. Sensors positioned to record every neural fluctuation, every moment of consciousness as it dissolved under the reverse-engineered alien technology. Maria's throat constricted as she realized this room had once been Diego's daycare center, where he'd played with building blocks and painted pictures of spaceships. "Will it hurt?" Diego's question pierced through her maternal armor like a blade. "For a little while," Maria whispered, lifting him into her arms. "But I'll be right here with you. We'll go to sleep together, and when we wake up, we'll be somewhere beautiful where no monsters can ever find us." Across the sector on Titan Station, former Admiral Torres cradled his sigh, 8-year-old daughter Isabella against his chest, her small fingers tracing the ribbons on his dress uniform. He'd worn it for her, wanted her last memory to be of Daddy in his finest clothes, the way she'd always seen him in the family portraits. "Tell me the story about the princess and the dragon again," Isabella whispered, her breath warm against his neck. Torres's voice cracked as he began the familiar tale, the words catching in his throat as neural disruptors powered up around them. "Once upon a time, there was a princess who wasn't afraid of dragons." The activation sequence began at precisely 0800 hours, coordinated across 12 stations throughout the solar system. Commander Blackwood stood in the central chamber of Aegis Prime, surrounded by 43 families who had volunteered for the final wave. Parents held children while quantum resonance amplifiers hummed to life, their mechanical whirring mixing with whispered lullabies and final words of love. Fleet Mind Zephyros monitored the human fleet formations as they retreated to minimum safe distance, their quantum dampening fields generating protective barriers around each vessel. 800 Cathara bioships dominated the space around Earth, their crystalline hulls gleaming in the pale sunlight as they prepared for the largest harvest in Dominion history. 3 billion humans awaited processing on the planet below. "Begin recording." Dr. Chen's voice transmitted across all stations simultaneously. The first neural disruptors activated on Luna Base. 12 families, 37 individuals, including 19 children, held each other as alien technology began its work. Consciousness dissolved layer by layer, but instead of the usual chaotic death screams, their final thoughts achieved perfect harmony. Parents focused entirely on their children's faces. Children trusted completely in parent. All protection. Love amplified suffering into something transcendent. Maria Santos sang a Spanish lullaby as Diego's awareness faded, her voice growing stronger even as her own neural patterns began fragmenting. "Duérmete mi niño, duérmete mi sol." The words carried across quantum frequencies, mixing with 44,000 other final moments as stations throughout the system contributed their voices to humanity's last song. Torres finished his fairy tale as Isabella's eyes fluttered closed, his own consciousness following hers into darkness. And they lived happily ever after, my princess, forever and always. Commander Blackwood experienced his own dissolution with the same mechanical precision he'd brought to every aspect of Protocol Lazarus. No final words, no dramatic gestures, simply a father choosing to die with the children he'd sent to their deaths rather than survive his own strategy. His last thought, broadcast through quantum entanglement, carried the weight of 45,000 sacrifices. Marcus, Daddy's coming home. Zephyros felt the trauma frequencies hit the Kithara consciousness network like a tidal wave of impossible agony. Individual awareness exploded through his mind as the collective connection shattered, leaving him isolated in a skull that had never known the weight of singular thought. Terror flooded his consciousness, not tactical assessment of threat, but raw, primal fear of being alone. Around him, 800 bioships began tumbling out of formation as their pilots experienced the same unprecedented separation. Scout Captain Nix screamed through individual vocal cords, her voice carrying across emergency frequencies that had never transmitted personal anguish before. Wing Commander Thex fired his weapons randomly into space, his targeting systems unable to coordinate with a collective mind that no longer existed. Where is everyone? The question echoed through hundreds of individual voices as Kithara consciousness fragmented into isolated fragments. I can't feel the others. I can't feel home. Bioships crashed into each other as navigation systems designed for collective coordination failed completely. Weapon systems activated randomly, firing neural disruptors at fellow Kithara vessels whose crews no longer recognized friendly identification signatures. The perfectly orchestrated armada dissolved into chaos as individual panic overwhelmed tactical programming. Zephyros watched his species destroy itself through the viewports of his crippled vessel, documenting behavior patterns that defied everything the Dominion understood about warfare. The humans had turned their greatest emotional vulnerability into a weapon that struck at the core of Kithara existence. They'd weaponized love itself, transforming parental bonds into strategic assets more devastating than any technology. Most terrifying of all, they'd done so while fully understanding the cost. 45,000 volunteers had died not from desperation or coercion, but from cold calculation that their suffering would protect billions of others. Parents had chosen to watch their children die slowly, consciously, in agony, and had done so with steady hands and clear voices because love demanded nothing less than perfect sacrifice. The quantum interference began dissipating after 37 minutes, but the damage was complete. 600 Kithara vessels drifted powerless through space, their crews either dead from collision damage or paralyzed by individual consciousness they'd never learned to manage. The remaining 200 ships fled toward the galactic rim, their pilots desperately seeking reconnection with collective minds that might still exist beyond the interference zone. Zephyros, his individual awareness slowly stabilizing, transmitted a final message through failing communication systems. The words carried across space toward any surviving Kithara consciousness, warning them about the species that had just redefined the meaning of warfare through perfect love, perfectly weaponized. They love their children enough to murder them, his transmission whispered across the void. And they love them enough to weep while doing it. Never again threaten what humans call family. They will destroy themselves to destroy you, and they will make both deaths beautiful. As his bioship systems shut down permanently, Zephyros documented the last lesson of his species' expansion, that there existed forces in the universe more dangerous than superior technology, more devastating than overwhelming numbers, more unstoppable than perfect tactical coordination. The humans had taught the galaxy that love, when pushed beyond all moral boundaries, became the most terrible weapon of all. The human fleet emerged from behind Jupiter's gravitational shadow 6 hours after the last quantum interference faded, their vessels moving through the debris field that had once been the most feared armada in galactic history. Commander Jessica Hayes, now the highest-ranking officer in humanity's remaining forces, stood on the bridge of the battleship Determination and surveyed a graveyard of crystalline hulls floating like broken glass among the stars. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported, voice hollow with exhaustion, "we're detecting life signs aboard 17 Cathara vessels. Minimal power, no weapons active. They're not responding to our hails." Hayes nodded, her jaw set in the same uncompromising line that had defined Blackwood's final months. She'd volunteered her own 8-year-old nephew for Protocol Lazarus, watched him die through Kioam. Ontum feeds while maintaining perfect tactical coordination. Now she carried the weight of command in a universe forever changed by what they'd chosen to become. All ships begin systematic termination of remaining alien vessels. No survivors. The order spread through the fleet like wildfire, and Hayes watched through her tactical displays as human crews prepared to execute helpless enemies. Many of the gunners wept openly at their stations, tears streaming down faces as they targeted weapon systems at crippled bioships. Their emotional pain didn't impair their accuracy, it enhanced it, turning grief into surgical precision that would have impressed their lost commander. Aboard the crippled Cathara vessel, Eternal Harmony, fleet-mind Zephyros felt individual consciousness stabilizing into patterns his species had never evolved to handle. Loneliness, fear, the terrible weight of existing without collective guidance. Around him, his crew had either died from separation shock or retreated into catatonic states, their minds unable to process isolation after millions of years of networked existence. Through failing sensors, he watched human vessels approach his position with weapons charged. No communication attempts, no demands for surrender, simply methodical extermination of everything that had threatened their children. The tactical displays showed his bioship's shields failing, weapons systems dark, life support cycling toward failure. Zephyros activated his personal recording matrix one final time, transmitting observations toward the galactic rim, where scattered Cathara survivors might still maintain collective consciousness. His analysis would serve as the species' only warning about what they'd encountered in this remote corner of space. Personal log, Fleet Mind Zephyros, final entry. The humans have achieved victory through strategic applications of emotional bonding that our tactical databases never anticipated. They weaponized their strongest psychological vulnerabilities, transforming parental love into coordinated sacrifice that generated quantum interference patterns capable of severing our collective consciousness. The first human torpedo struck his vessel's hull, and Zephyros felt his remaining crew members die around him. Individual deaths, isolated consciousnesses extinguished without connection to the greater network. He continued recording as his ship's systems failed. Critical analysis. Human strategic thinking becomes more efficient under extreme emotional stress, not less. Their capacity for coordinated sacrifice exceeds all mathematical models. They possess psychological weapons that bypass technological superiority entirely. Recommendation: never threaten what humans designate as family units. They will murder their own offspring to murder you, and they will weep while accomplishing both objectives. The second torpedo tore through his bioship's quantum core, and Zephyros felt his individual consciousness preparing for a death his species had no cultural framework to understand, no reintegration with collective memory, no continuity beyond singular existence, just ending. Final observation: emotional bonds are not their weakness. They are weapons more devastating than any technology we possess. The humans love their children enough to sacrifice them perfectly, and that perfect love makes them the most dangerous species the universe has ever produced. The transmission cut to static as eternal harmony exploded in brilliant flame, taking with it the last Kithara witness to humanity's transformation. 6 weeks later, Earth began the slow process of rebuilding. The memo, Real Gardens grew in perfect silence, each of the 45,000 volunteer names etched in quantum crystal that would preserve their memory until the heat death of the universe. Parents who had survived brought flowers to markers bearing their children's names, their faces carrying expressions that mixed grief with something approaching pride. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before Marcus Blackwood's memorial, her hands shaking as she placed a small toy spaceship beside his marker. The Protocol Lazarus recordings remained sealed in quantum storage facilities deep beneath the Antarctic ice, classified beyond any security clearance humanity possessed. The sounds of children dying for strategic advantage would never again echo through human consciousness. "Ma'am?" Her assistant approached carefully, holding a decoded transmission from the outer rim. "Intelligence has intercepted Kythera communications. They're warning other species about us." Chen read the translation, her scientific mind analyzing alien psychology through words that carried terror across interstellar distances. The surviving Kithara had branded humanity as the most feared species in known space, warning civilizations thousands of light-years away to never threaten human children. "They're calling us the love-death species," her assistant reported. "The message has spread through 7 different galactic communities. We're being avoided by civilizations that have never heard of Earth before." Chen nodded, understanding the weight of what they'd accomplished. Humanity had saved itself from extinction, but the cost had transformed them into something that made even advanced alien species flee in terror. They'd learned to weaponize their deepest emotional bonds, and the universe would never again underestimate the strategic applications of perfect love. The memorial gardens stood testament to victory achieved through sacrifice so profound that it redefined the meaning of both concepts. Humanity had discovered that their greatest weakness, the willingness to die for their children, was actually their most devastating strength when applied with mathematical precision. As Chen walked among the markers, she reflected on the terrible equation that had saved their species. 45,000 children had died so that 3 billion others might live. Parents had chosen to watch their offspring suffer because love demanded nothing less than perfect sacrifice. And in doing so, they'd created a weapon that no alien technology could counter or predict. The universe had learned to fear humanity not for their technology or their numbers, but for the terrifying beauty of their emotional bonds transformed into strategic assets. They'd become the species that loved their children enough to murder them, and wept while doing it perfectly. And in the cold depths of space, scattered across 1,000 worlds, alien civilizations passed warnings through quantum networks and hyperspace communications, sharing a simple message that would echo through galactic history. Never threaten what humans call family. They will destroy themselves to destroy you, and they will make both deaths into something beautiful and terrible and utterly unstoppable. Humanity had won not by becoming monsters, but by discovering that their capacity for perfect love was the most monstrous weapon the universe had ever seen. And in winning, they'd ensured that no species would ever again make the mistake of underestimating parents who would sacrifice everything, including their own children, to protect what they cherished most. The war was over. Humanity had survived. But the price of that survival would echo through their souls for generations to come. A reminder that even the most beautiful emotions could be transformed into instruments of absolute destruction when wielded with mathematical precision and unwavering love. If this story gave you chills about the true cost of survival, hit that subscribe button for more mind-bending HFY stories where humanity's greatest weaknesses become our deadliest weapons. Now we want to hear from you. If you were Commander Blackwood, could you sacrifice your own child to save billions? What would you weaponize to protect the people you love most? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where love becomes the universe's most terrifying weapon.